The 22nd of June, 1941. Under the codename Operation Barbarossa, Nazi Germany invades the Soviet Union, its ally in the war against Poland. Among the first territories to be occupied by Nazi forces is Latvia, one of the three Baltic states that Stalin brutally annexed in the summer of 1940. By the time of the German invasion, 5% of Latvia's almost 2 million population is Jewish, and the Nazis, assisted by local collaborators, quickly implement their plan to exterminate the Jewish community. They deprive Jews of their basic human rights, forcing them into ghettos where they face extreme overcrowding, severe food shortages, and starvation. In the weeks that follow, Jews are beaten, tortured, and subjected to mass executions by the Nazis, who force their victims to undress before being shot and buried in mass graves. By the time Latvia is liberated by the Red Army in the summer of 1944, approximately 3/4 of the Jewish population is wiped out. One of the main perpetrators responsible for these atrocities is Viktors Arājs. Victors Arajs was born on the 13th of January 1910 in the town of Baldone, then part of the Russian Empire. His father Theodor was a modest blacksmith, and his mother Berta Anna came from a wealthy Baltic German family which owned a 160-hectare farm. At the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, Victor's father Theodor was conscripted into the army and did not return to the family, so his mother brought him and his younger sister up alone. Nevertheless, Theodor Arājs came to Latvia after the revolution via China and brought a new Chinese wife with him. Victor's parents divorced in 1927. After completing high school, Arājs entered the Latvian army, as 2 years of military service was mandatory at that time. In 1932, he began studying law at the University of Latvia in Riga, where he also joined Letonia, an elite student fraternity. However, due to financial constraints, Arājs had to seek employment to support himself and took a job with the police. In his police career, he reached the rank of lieutenant and gained a reputation for being power-hungry and holding extreme views. In 1936, Arājs married Zelma Zebote, who was 6 years his senior and a wealthy owner of several shops. The Second World War started on the 1st of September 1939 when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. In June 1940, under the pretext of protecting the Baltic states and in line with the secret agreements made in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviet Union occupied and annexed Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The Soviet occupation of the Baltic states was marked by widespread atrocities. Thousands of people, including political dissidents, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens, were forcibly deported to Siberian labor camps under brutal conditions, where many faced starvation, harsh labor, and disease, and a great number never returned to their homeland. The NKVD, the Interior Ministry and Secret Police of the Soviet Union, targeted anyone seen as a threat, creating an atmosphere of fear and oppression. Just a year later, on Sunday the 22nd of June 1941, under the codename Operation Barbarossa, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. This invasion dramatically altered the fate of many communities under Soviet control, including the Jews of Latvia. Before the Second World War, the Jewish community in Latvia was vibrant and culturally rich, playing a significant role in the country's economy, education, and social life. Jews had lived in Latvia for centuries, and by the late 1930s, their population had grown to about 95,000, making up roughly 5% of the total population. This community was diverse, with active participation in various political movements, including Zionism, socialism, and religious traditionalism. Jewish schools, newspapers, and theaters flourished, particularly in Riga, the capital, which was a major center of Jewish learning and culture. However, despite their significant contributions, Jews in Latvia faced growing anti-Semitism, particularly during the 1930s, reflecting broader European trends. The rise of authoritarian regimes in Europe further heightened these tensions. The situation deteriorated dramatically after the Soviet Union occupied Latvia. The Soviet regime quickly suppressed Jewish institutions, nationalized businesses, and arrested or deported many Jewish leaders and intellectuals. Shortly after the Red Army withdrew from Riga to the advancing German forces, Arājs took over an abandoned police station at 19 Valdemar Street. On the 1st of July 1941, German troops entered the Latvian capital, followed by the Einsatzgruppen, the Nazi mobile death squads. Arājs' future commander, Franz Stahlecker, who was in charge of Einsatzgruppe A, arrived with a Latvian translator, Hans Dresler, whom Arājs had known from high school and the Latvian army. Thanks to this connection, the Germanic-looking Arājs was introduced to Stahlecker and quickly gained his trust. Stahlecker tasked Arājs with establishing a special commando unit as part of the newly formed Latvian Auxiliary Police. In response, Arājs recruited the core members from his student fraternity and individuals with far-right views, ensuring they were ready for immediate operations. This unit quickly became infamous as the Arājs Kommando. Soon after, Stahlecker instructed Arājs to organize a pogrom against Riga's Jews that would appear spontaneous. To strengthen the new commando, the Germans ran a recruitment ad in the pro-German Latvian newspaper named Tevi, calling on all patriotic Latvians, members of the Latvian ultra-nationalist party Perkonkrasts, students, officers, militiamen, and citizens willing to help cleanse the country of what they called the undesirable elements, to report to the security group at 19 Valdemar Street in Riga, which served as the headquarters of the Arājs Kommando. Initially, the Arājs Kommando numbered between 300 and 500 men in 1941, but by 1942 it had dramatically grown to around 1,500. Arājs recruited ex-military men, security guards and policemen, as well as students and even school children into his team. On the 4th of July 1941, the Arājs Kommando carried out one of their most barbaric actions. Arājs' men trapped around 20 Jews, mostly women and children, inside Riga's Great Choral Synagogue on Gogol Street. They set the building on fire and threw grenades through the windows, ensuring that their victims, trapped inside, were burnt alive. The Germans filmed the horrific scene and later used the footage in a military newsreel. A similar atrocity was committed by Latvian Air Force officer Herbert Cukurs, a key figure in the Arājs Kommando. Along with his gang, Cukurs set fire to the synagogue on Stabu Street in Riga after dragging Jews from the neighboring houses and locking them inside. Eyewitnesses heard the horrifying screams of those trapped, who broke the windows in a desperate attempt to escape, only to be shot by Cukurs as they fled the flames. About 400 Jews were killed in the pogroms in early July. The burning of synagogues was only one part of the widespread brutality carried out by the Arājs Kommando. Their campaign of terror extended far beyond individual acts of destruction, systematically targeting Jewish men, women, and children. The Jews who were arrested were taken to the police headquarters and the central prison in Riga, also known as Centralka, where the brutality only intensified. The elderly and sick were brought in naked, while young women were stripped and thrown into cellars where they were raped. In some cases, women were sexually abused in front of their husbands and children, turning the ordeal into a scene of utter humiliation and despair. Jews who wore traditional clothing, particularly those with beards, were singled out for further degradation. They were dragged around by their beards or forcibly shaved to humiliate them and strip them of their dignity and identity. Others were forced at gunpoint to wear the prayer shawl and phylacteries, only to be mocked further by being made to sing and dance to Soviet songs. The cruelty inflicted upon the Jews in Riga's police headquarters and central prison was just the beginning of the horrors to come. As Hitler's goal of making the Baltic states Judenfrei, or free of Jews, took shape, Arājs and his commando became key players in executing this horrific plan. Throughout the summer of 1941, the Arājs Kommando was called into action twice a week, where they were put to work shooting Jews into mass graves dug in the Rumbula Forest, about 6 kilometers northeast of Riga city centre. By the end of that summer, Arājs and his men had likely killed around 4,000 Jews and 1,000 communists in this way. To make his operations easier, Arājs took control of several blue buses usually used for public transport in Riga. Loading them with up to 40 of his policemen, he travelled from village to village, rounding up Jews for execution. By the end of each visit, the area would be chillingly declared Judenfrei, or free of Jews. Viktors Arājs played a central and leading role in the atrocities committed in the Riga Ghetto, particularly during the Rumbula massacre in late 1941. The Riga Ghetto was established by Nazi forces in October 1941, shortly after their invasion of Latvia. Located in the city's poor and densely populated Moscow district, the ghetto became a holding area for thousands of Latvian Jews who were forcibly relocated from their homes. The conditions within the ghetto were horrific. Overcrowding, starvation, and disease were rampant, with little to no access to basic necessities. The ghetto was surrounded by barbed wire and heavily guarded, isolating its inhabitants from the rest of the city. The Rumbula massacre, which occurred on the 30th of November and 8th of December 1941, marked one of the most brutal episodes in the history of the Holocaust in Latvia. As part of the Nazis' final solution, around 25,000 Jews from the Riga Ghetto were rounded up, forced to march several kilometers to the Rumbula Forest, and systematically executed. The victims were made to undress and lie face down in large pits, where they were then shot by firing squads. The entire process was carried out with chilling efficiency over the course of just 2 days. Arājs and his men played a key role in the clearing of the ghetto and at the killing pits, where they guarded and forced the victims to march to their deaths. While the actual shootings were carried out by the Einsatzgruppen personnel, members of the Arājs Kommando were tasked with loading the stolen valuables of the victims onto trucks for transport back to Riga. Notably, Victors Arājs himself was reported to be drunk during the operation, a behavior not uncommon among those involved in the atrocities. In 1942, Arājs and his men were deployed in anti-partisan operations in Belarus. Alongside their involvement in mass murder, they inflicted brutal treatment on their victims, often subjecting them to savage beatings and rapes. In recognition of his valuable service to the Nazi cause, Arājs was promoted in 1943 to SS Sturmbannführer, equivalent to the rank of major. During the 3 years of Nazi occupation of Latvia, around 70,000 Jews were murdered, approximately 3/4 of the pre-war total of 95,000. The Second World War in Europe ended on the 8th of May, 1945. After the war, Viktors Arājs was placed as a prisoner of war in a British internment camp in Germany, where he remained until 1949, when he disappeared. Afterwards, Arājs went into hiding in Germany, where he disguised himself as his wife's brother and adopted her maiden name, Baldone. He even managed to obtain a Latvian passport from the Latvian embassy in London, which continued to operate after Latvia had been annexed by the Soviet Union. Between 1944 and 1966, 352 members of the Arājs Kommando were prosecuted. Though many of the lower-ranking members lived out their lives without facing any legal consequences for their actions, their leader, Viktors Arājs, did face justice in the end. From 1950, Arājs settled in Frankfurt am Main in West Germany, where he found work with a printing company. For the next 25 years, he lived as a free man without facing justice for his crimes. However, in July 1975, West German authorities arrested him and put him on trial for his involvement in the Rumbula massacre. In December 1979, after 199 court sessions, he was found guilty of participating in the murder of 13,000 people and sentenced to life imprisonment. One of the key witnesses was Zelma Shepshelovits, a Latvian Jewish woman whom Arājs had brutally raped. She survived the war, and her powerful testimony was crucial in securing his conviction. In the final years of his imprisonment, Arājs was allowed to leave the prison to visit his girlfriend in Frankfurt. On the 13th of January 1988, the day of his 78th birthday, Victors Arājs died of a heart attack in the prison of Kassel in West Germany after returning from one of these visits. There were no tears shed for Viktors Arājs. Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.